They say you know your absolute worth in the corporate hierarchy when the company starts to panic the exact second you take a single sick day. Well, my employer sent 4 Slack messages, 2 frantic emails, and a junior engineer to knock on my apartment door when I was laid up with severe influenzas. That was how critical I had become to their daily operations. Not that anyone in executive management ever admitted it out loud, of course. I was their secret weapon, which in corporate human resources code simply meant doing everything, taking zero credit, and never asking uncomfortable questions about compensation. Have you ever spent years building a complex system architecture from scratch with your own hands, watched it save the enterprise from a 6-month operational backlog, only to have it rolled out under someone else's name like you were a ghost in the server room? That was a typical Tuesday for me. Every single Tuesday for 7 straight years. The company, Apexion Systems, operated like a frat house dressed in navy khakis and regurgitated LinkedIn leadership quotes. Friday management meetings were a relentless contest of who could shout the word synergy the loudest while displaying colorful pitch decks created by unpaid interns. The executives with legacy family names occupied the expansive corner offices. The engineers who refused to laugh at their terrible jokes were quietly placed on performance improvement plans. I was 48 years old, seasoned, and possessed zero interest in office politics. I was not on probation, but I certainly was not laughing either. I sat 2 rows from the tinted windows, tucked neatly behind a colleague who smelled of cheap body spray and believed code refactoring was a personal insult. My workstation was a sanctuary of controlled chaotic order, 3 curved high-resolution monitors, walls covered in organized sticky notes, and one half-dying potted succulent that somehow captured my persistent work ethic. I did not indulge in mindless small talk. I delivered bulletproof code. I personally engineered the optimization tools that saved our supply chain unit during the peak pandemic disruption. The dynamic interface dashboards that rendered our analytical metrics readable by human beings, and the entire asynchronous automation layer that the chief technology officer claimed was divinely inspired during a corporate retreat. In truth, he meant inspired by himself, though I had written every line of it in a caffeinated trance at 2:14 in the morning on a rainy Sunday. For all that labor, my annual reward was a $30 DoorDash gift card and an executive pizza party that got rescheduled 3 times before management forgot about it entirely. That was when I stopped placing my hopes in corporate gratitude. Being indispensable without being visible is a dangerous position. You are the structural pillar holding the entire ceiling up. But the moment water leaks from above, management blames you for not redecorating the room. People called me the spreadsheet whisperer during office happy hours, like it was a grand compliment. Yet when annual promotions were evaluated, my name was mysteriously omitted. When salary increases were distributed, I received a warm pat on the shoulder and a vague promise for next quarter. It would have been far easier if I hated the work itself, but I did not. I loved engineering. There is an understated elegance in clean, modular architecture, in solving intricate logic puzzles that have stumped 5 senior developers. I took pride in building robust infrastructure that made everyone's job seamless. But dedication should never be confused with gullibility. I observed what was happening across the building. I watched individuals with loud voices and mediocre technical abilities leapfrog over genuine talent into executive director roles. I kept my head down and told myself it was temporary. But temporary stretched into 7 long years of almost there, and you are not quite leadership material yet, while 20-something relatives of board members became vice presidents overnight. Still, I remained at my desk. Not out of weakness, but because I was strategically studying the enterprise. I learned where every network wire connected, where every system vulnerability resided, and how every proprietary script functioned. You would be astonished by how many root administrative credentials still retain my encrypted signature, and how many critical algorithms management forgot I had architected single-handedly. They believed they had buried me under routine task tickets and performance reviews, but I was not buried. I was strategically burrowed. The organizational restructuring arrived like an unwanted storm, sudden, awkward, and accompanied by a heavy silence that warned everyone not to ask questions. Management launched the transition with the usual corporate buzzwords: flattening corporate hierarchy, modernizing technological vision, and empowering agile leaders. The real translation was simple. The chief executive officer, Donald Lawson, was tired of pretending his 30-year-old nephew, Brad Lawson, was not a walking liability, so he manufactured a custom executive title for him, like a participation trophy. Brad arrived fresh off a 6-week executive acceleration program hosted at a luxury golf resort in Arizona. His sole technical credential consisted of once selling a digital art token to a social media influencer for $12,000 and declaring himself a tech visionary. The startup he previously operated was an aggregation website for viral dance videos that crashed whenever more than 20 users clicked simultaneously. Management introduced Brad at the quarterly all-hands assembly as though he were a technological savior descending from the clouds. Our chief operating officer beamed beside Brad, who wore a $300 designer hoodie over his dress shirt. Brad will be assuming complete operational oversight for our core product systems division. The COO announced with rehearsed enthusiasm. That division was me. Every server pipeline, optimization script, and database integration layer had been authored and maintained by my hands for 7 years. Now, I reported directly to Brad. At our initial one-on-one meeting, Brad arrived 9 minutes late while eating a banana. He did not open his notebook or laptop. He simply scrolled through his smartphone while nodding absently as I explained our system architecture and pending deployment milestones. Within 5 minutes, he interrupted me twice. First, to ask if our core legacy backend was blockchain ready, and second, to state flatly, "I do not need you to think, Richard. I just need you to execute. Execute like I was a mechanical printer, like 7 years of system design was merely a button press away from irrelevance." I clenched my jaw so tightly I could feel the tension in my neck. By the following morning, my administrative access to the repository was quietly restricted. I could view directory structures, but I could no longer commit changes or deploy code. No formal email explanation was provided. I submitted 2 inquiry tickets to the IT service desk, but they ghosted me, confirming my suspicion that the order came from the executive suite. I quietly investigated the internal document repositories like a forensic investigator. That was when I discovered a fresh PDF file uploaded to the shared executive folder by Brad Lawson. It was an exact copy of my core system optimization framework. Every class structure, conditional statement, and architectural comment remained identical, carrying my distinct coding style and algorithmic logic. However, the title page had been replaced, declaring it the Lawson Proprietary Framework authored by Brad Lawson. I stared at the high-resolution monitor for several minutes before a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Brad had not even bothered to sanitize the file. My original initials, RV, remained embedded in the changelogs. My test scripts were intact, and my custom error-handling routines were untouched. He had essentially placed his executive sticker on my hand-built vehicle while leaving my tools in the trunk. I initially contemplated reporting the blatant theft to Brenda Jenkins in Human Resources. But then I recalled Sarah from accounting, who had reported a similar incident 2 years prior when her manager claimed her financial modeling engine as his own creation. Sarah was placed on an involuntary performance plan and terminated 3 weeks later, conveniently right after the company filed its quarterly report using her model. No, I would not make the mistake of trusting HR. I decided to document everything. I made secure backups of commit histories, exported system logs, preserved email threads, and photographed my original physical whiteboard diagrams with cryptographic timestamps. Brad and executive leadership assumed I was an aging developer, too frightened of job loss to fight back. They did not realize that an experienced engineer who understands the system infrastructure also knows precisely where to plant the legal explosive charges. Brad strutted through the office like a conqueror in a stolen kingdom, holding high-level strategy meetings with vice presidents where he misused technical terms and referred to API endpoints as application widgets. Every time he passed my desk with that condescending smirk, I smiled back politely, the way one smiles at a man who does not realize his parachute has been swapped for an empty backpack. The corporate culture shifted rapidly over the following 3 weeks. Spontaneous conversations in the break room ceased entirely. Collaboration was replaced by frantic jockeying for Brad's favor as employees sought to secure their positions under the new regime. Brad began assigning childish nicknames to engineering pods and officially renamed my optimization engine the Lawson Speed Zone. He promised prospective investors that our backend could handle 10 times its current throughput, despite having no understanding of how the load balancers functioned. I maintained absolute composure. I attended Brad's weekly alignment sessions, nodding quietly while he recited buzzwords stolen from late-night tech blogs. When he referred to my database cleanup algorithm as a neat little script, I merely agreed. But behind my quiet exterior, I was meticulously building an unassailable legal defense. My primary action was securing my historical archives. Throughout my 7 years at Apexion Systems, I maintained an offline, encrypted backup drive containing every iteration of software architecture I had authored on my personal equipment prior to its integration into the company's infrastructure. Every framework module, standalone algorithm, and system interface was cataloged with original timestamps, creation logs, and independent development records. This represented nearly a decade of my personal intellectual property. Next, I began scheduling external appointments during my lunch hours and personal time. To anyone monitoring my corporate calendar, the entries appeared vague and nondescript. IP scope review, system integrity audit, and private consultation. I intentionally left those blocks visible to provoke curiosity. Brad actually confronted me near the coffee bar one afternoon, leaning against the counter with a patronizing grin. "Hey, Richard, if you are planning on jumping ship to another firm, do me a solid and finish the fourth quarter rollout first," he says with a smirk. I looked him dead in the eye and replied calmly, "Of course, Brad. I would never leave the system without a complete roadmap." What Brad and HR failed to realize was that those external meetings were not with headhunters or competing software firms. I was meeting with senior intellectual property attorneys at Vance and Hawthorne Legal Group, a premier federal patent litigation firm. I sat in a glass conference room with 2 seasoned patent lawyers, laying out thick binders of evidence. I demonstrated how my original core engine, developed independently on my own time before joining Apexion, had been absorbed into the company's primary product line without a formal transfer of ownership or licensing agreement. I provided cryptographic commit histories, personal repository timestamps, and internal email archives, proving that management had utilized my proprietary software while denying proper compensation or title assignment. The lead patent attorney reviewed the documentation, examined the time-stamped code blocks, and smiled with quiet professional satisfaction. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, specifically Sections 101, 102, and Section 271, as well as the Federal Defend Trade Secrets Act under Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1836, you possess an ironclad claim of original authorship and proprietary ownership, the attorney informed me. Apexion Systems has integrated your unassigned intellectual property directly into their commercial offerings, and Brad Lawson's public declaration of ownership constitutes clear willful misappropriation. On a Wednesday evening, at exactly 43, sitting in a quiet coffee shop near the legal office, my attorneys formally submitted 3 provisional patent applications to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The filings covered the core system optimization layer, the asynchronous integration logic, and the adaptive user interface translator. The legal receipts were time-stamped, secured, and registered under my personal limited liability company, Vance Technologies, LLC. I did not celebrate with champagne or loud declarations. I simply felt a steady wave of profound professional clarity. The individuals who sought to erase my contributions had completely forgotten that I designed the very foundation upon which their business stood. 2 days later, Brad convened a mandatory all-hands assembly in the main auditorium to unveil what he called the corporate technology evolution. The presentation screens displayed slick graphics featuring the Lawson framework. Brad paced across the stage with a wireless microphone, boasting about his revolutionary technological vision. Slide after slide displayed my architectural diagrams, my data flow models, and my exact system specifications, all bearing Brad's name in bold lettering. He claimed credit for predictive load balancing, unified data queuing, and human-centered design panels, systems I had labored over during long weekends while eating cold takeout at my desk. I sat in the fifth row, watching the spectacle with detached amusement. The chief executive officer, Donald Lawson, sat in the front row, clapping proudly for his nephew. The chief operating officer nodded in approval, while junior managers cheered on command. It was a bizarre theatrical performance, an executive accepting praise for an engine he could not even compile on his own laptop. When the presentation concluded, my direct manager approached my desk. "Brad wants you to onboard our newest junior developer, Megan," she instructed in a low voice. "Walk her through the system architecture and ensure she understands the Lawson framework mechanics." I smiled pleasantly and replied, "I would be delighted to assist her." Megan arrived at my workstation the following morning, carrying a fresh notepad filled with scribbled quotes from Brad's presentation. She was a bright, enthusiastic bootcamp graduate who was genuinely eager to learn. Over the next 4 hours, I walked her through the actual back-end code, explaining the underlying logic and system dependencies. As we navigated the repository directories, Megan paused, tilting her head in confusion. "This is strange," she remarked, pointing at a core module script. "The documentation in the internal wiki says this was created last week by Brad, but the source header comments carry your initials, RV, dated 4 years ago, and there is a typo in the comment line. Efficiency spelled without an I." I maintained a neutral expression and replied softly, "System documentation often undergoes revisions during corporate realignments." Megan looked at me, her eyes widening slightly as she connected the dots, but she wisely refrained from asking further questions. That evening, I conducted a thorough scan of the internal developer wiki. Brad had copied entire chapters from my personal design notes verbatim. In his haste to publish the material under his name, he had failed to remove a personal note I had written at the bottom of a legacy module description 4 years prior. Note to self: if anyone ever attempts to rename this core architecture, ensure the database failsafe logs the discrepancy automatically. The text remained intact inside Brad's published documentation. He had not even read the material he stole. He believed he had secured total control, completely unaware that his stolen crown was about to trigger an avalanche of legal consequences. The executive trap sprung on a humid Thursday morning at exactly 9:42. I received an urgent calendar invitation titled HR Touchpoint, Compliance Discrepancy Review. The vague wording was classic human resources protocol, a sanitized corporate euphemism for an administrative execution. I saved my current local files, closed my development environment, and walked down the quiet hallway toward Conference Room B. The room was isolated, featuring frosted glass panels, a single long oak table, and a box of tissues placed conspicuously in the center. HR Director Brenda Jenkins sat at the head of the table, her expression cold and rigid. Brad Lawson sat beside her, sipping an iced coffee with a look of triumphant arrogance. Brenda did not offer a seat or small talk. "We have identified several serious policy compliance violations regarding your recent corporate activity, Richard," Brenda began, sliding a printed document across the table. "Our internal monitoring systems logged multiple calendar entries labeled Private Legal, System Integrity Audit, and IP Scope Review. Furthermore, your network activity shows unauthorized repository queries during non-standard hours." Brad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We cannot tolerate internal opacity or potential conflicts of interest, Richard," Brad asserted with fake concern. "You have been observed taking external meetings during business hours, which raises significant red flags regarding trade secret security and loyalty to Apexion systems." I looked from Brad's smug face to Brenda's stern expression. The hypocrisy was astonishing. The executive who had stolen my entire software architecture was accusing me of trade secret violations because I consulted patent attorneys regarding my own intellectual property. They anticipated a defensive reaction, pleading, anxiety, or desperate explanations. Instead, I rested my hands calmly on the back of a conference chair and looked directly at Brenda. "If management has made the decision to terminate my employment, Please present the formal notice. I stated in a clear, measured voice. Otherwise, I have critical architecture tasks to complete before the end of the day. Brenda's eyes flickered with surprise, while Brad's confident smirk momentarily faltered. They had expected an emotional breakdown, not surgical precision. Brenda cleared her throat and slid a secondary folder forward. Effective immediately, your employment with Apexion Systems is terminated for gross breach of confidentiality protocols and non-disclosure obligations, she declared. Security will accompany you to your desk to retrieve your personal belongings. I reviewed the document carefully. Management was attempting to execute a summary cause termination to deny severance and invalidate any post-employment claims. However, their sudden action created a severe legal vulnerability under federal labor standards and the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 U.S. Code Section 2101. By terminating me without cause or required notice while asserting baseless confidentiality claims, Apexion Systems effectively severed their contractual hold on my future work while failing to restrict my pre-existing personal IP. May I retain a signed copy of this termination notice? I asked calmly. Brenda signed the page with a sharp stroke of her pen and handed it over. Exactly 20 minutes later, a security guard stood beside my workstation as I packed my personal items into a single cardboard box. My 3 monitors were powered down, my sticky notes were cleared, and my half-dying succulent was carefully placed inside the box. The surrounding developers watched in stunned silence. Megan looked up from her desk, her expression filled with concern and quiet disbelief. Brad appeared near the elevator bank as the security guard escorted me out. He stood with his arms crossed, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "No hard feelings, Richard," Brad said loudly enough for nearby staff to hear. "Sometimes corporate restructuring requires removing legacy friction." I stepped into the elevator cab, turned around deliberately, and looked Brad dead in the eye. As the automated doors began to close, I smiled back calmly and uttered 6 simple words. "You caught me, Brad. Good luck." The elevator doors sealed shut, cutting off his bewildered expression. Brad assumed my words were an admission of guilt, a confession that I had been caught seeking external employment. He had no idea that my statement was a confirmation of his own doom. By terminating me under false pretenses and continuing to deploy my proprietary software architecture under his name, Brad and Apexion Systems had walked directly into a massive federal patent infringement trap. Over the following 48 hours, the corporate narrative within Apexion Systems turned hostile. Internal Slack channels buzzed with deliberate rumors. Executives circulated stories claiming I had been terminated for attempting to sell proprietary code to market competitors. Brad used the opportunity to cement his authority, officially renaming the main engineering channel Lawson Systems Command, and posting motivational quotes about pruning weak branches to foster corporate growth. He informed the engineering staff that my departure would not impact deployment schedules, boasting that his framework was fully capable of operating without legacy oversight. Meanwhile, sitting at my dining room table surrounded by 3 high-resolution displays, I operated with quiet intensity. I was not defeated. I was executing Phase 2. My legal team at Vance and Hawthorne prepared a comprehensive federal litigation strategy. We compiled forensic proof of original authorship, personal commit logs, dated design sketches, cryptographic hashes, and the signed termination letter alleging fictitious trade secret violations. While Apexion management celebrated my removal, my attorneys were finalizing formal patent enforcement actions that would rock the company to its financial core. The legal strike arrived on a Tuesday morning at 6:17 a.m. My smartphone chimed with an official notification from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. All 3 of my patent applications had received expedited approval and formal registration under Title 35 of the United States Code. Full statutory patent protection was formally granted to Vance Technologies LLC. 5 minutes later, my lead patent attorney sent a brief message. Patents issued. Dispatching federal cease and desist orders now. At 9 o'clock sharp, formal legal notices were delivered via certified courier and encrypted transmission to Apexion Systems' executive offices. Copies were delivered directly to Chief Executive Officer Donald Lawson, Chief Technology Officer Gerald Croft, HR Director Brenda Jenkins, and every member of the Board of Directors. The legal documents were unequivocal. Vance Technologies LLC asserted full patent ownership over the core system optimization engine, asynchronous integration layer, and dynamic translation interface currently operating within Apexion's commercial software suite. The notice demanded the immediate cessation of all unauthorized utilization of the patented technology and set a 72-hour deadline for corporate compliance. Simultaneously, under federal commercial transparency regulations, my legal team issued formal intellectual property status notifications to Apexion's primary enterprise clients. The notice politely informed corporate clients that key components of Apexion's software platform were subject to active federal patent enforcement, cautioning that continued unauthorized deployment could expose third-party users to contributory infringement claims under Title 35 U.S. Code. Section 271. The impact within Apexion systems was instantaneous and catastrophic. Within 2 hours of receiving the notice, Apexion's largest logistics client, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, temporarily suspended a pending $4.6 million software contract. Their legal counsel issued an emergency freeze on system deployment until Apexion could provide absolute proof of clear intellectual property title. Inside Apexion's corporate headquarters, panic erupted. The chief technology officer summoned the internal legal team and senior infrastructure engineers to an emergency session. He ordered an immediate forensic audit of the entire code base to disprove my patent claims. But as the senior engineers examined the repository directories, the reality became terrifyingly clear. Every core module within the Lawson framework was anchored to my original patented algorithms. Embedded deep within the source code were my original cryptographic signatures, creation timestamps, and unmistakable coding markers. In one critical database management script, the engineers discovered an unedited comment line I had written years prior, core version 1.0 because Lawson is broke at JavaScript. The evidence was absolute, undeniable, and devastating. Brad Lawson was called into an emergency session with the CTO and corporate legal counsel. When confronted with the forensic code audit, Brad attempted to dodge responsibility, claiming I had merely assisted with basic implementation while he provided the overarching strategic vision. The CTO slammed a stack of code printouts onto the table, his face red with anger. "Strategic vision?" he shouted. "His cryptographic signature is on every single function block. You removed his access, slapped your name on his patent-pending architecture, and presented it to the board as your personal creation. You have exposed this entire company to massive federal liability." By mid-afternoon, news of the legal confrontation leaked to technology news outlets. A prominent legal tech journal published an extensive article titled "David and Goliath in the Server Room: Architect Files, Federal Patent Enforcement Against Apexion Systems." The article included side-by-side comparisons of Brad's public presentation slides and my official patent specification diagrams, exposing the blatant copying for the entire industry to see. Technology forums and LinkedIn feeds exploded with discussion, turning Brad Lawson into a viral symbol of corporate incompetence and executive plagiarism. Apexion's corporate inbox was flooded with frantic inquiries from investors, partners, and media outlets. Stock valuation metrics tumbled, and venture capital partners demanded an emergency meeting with the board. Brad Lawson abruptly deleted his social media profiles and ceased attending corporate briefings. The executive narrative of removing legacy friction had completely collapsed, replaced by the grim realization that management had fired the sole owner of their primary revenue engine. That evening, my lead attorney called with a satisfied tone. "Richard, Apexion's legal counsel just reached out. The board of directors is requesting an immediate settlement conference." The emergency settlement conference convened 5 days later at the Regional Legal Arbitration Center. The atmosphere inside the grand conference room was heavy with grim reality. Chief Executive Officer Donald Lawson sat flanked by 3 senior corporate defense partners, looking exhausted and visibly aged. Notably absent from the table was Brad Lawson, Corporate counsel had strictly forbidden him from attending or contacting any parties involved. Apexion's lead defense attorney opened the proceedings without posturing or rhetoric. We have reviewed the patent registrations, the forensic code audits, and the employment records, Richard, the attorney admitted quietly. It is clear that administrative errors and misplaced claims occurred regarding your intellectual property contributions. Apexion Systems desires a complete, permanent resolution to this matter. My lead attorney laid our demands on the table: absolute written acknowledgement of my sole original authorship, full release of all past claims, a 7-figure financial settlement covering retrospective unauthorized usage, and an ongoing annual licensing fee structure for any future deployment of my patented modules through Vance Technologies, LLC. Furthermore, under Federal Trade Secret Protection Standards and the Defend Trade Secrets Act under Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1836, Apexion was required to formally retract all false allegations of confidentiality violations made against my record. CO Donald Lawson looked across the table at me, his former employee whom he had allowed his nephew to push aside. "We accept the terms," Donald said softly, his voice defeated. The final settlement agreement was executed 48 hours later. Apexion Systems agreed to pay a 7-figure financial settlement, totaling $1,200,000 in immediate compensation, alongside a recurring 8% annual royalty on all commercial software revenues generated using my patented infrastructure. Within 24 hours of signing, Apexion issued an internal corporate announcement. Brad Lawson was officially terminated for gross executive misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. HR Director Brenda Jenkins and 2 vice presidents who aided the cover-up were forced into early retirement. 3 weeks following the settlement, I officially launched my independent software architecture firm, Foundry Technology Systems, LLC. We secured a modern office space in the technology district, equipping it with top-tier hardware and an open collaborative environment. My former colleague Megan resigned from Apexion to join Foundry as our lead system engineer. On her first day, I handed her a high-performance workstation and a written equity agreement. "At Foundry, if you build an architecture, your name goes on the patent," I told her with a smile. She grinned, opened her development environment, and went to work. Apexion Systems survived the scandal, but their corporate reputation was permanently altered. They now pay annual licensing fees to Vance Technologies, LLC for every server instance running my core optimization engine. Every quarter, a substantial royalty payment is deposited automatically into my corporate bank account, a perpetual financial reminder of the price of corporate arrogance. Sometimes people ask if I harbor lingering bitterness toward Donald Lawson, Brad, or the corporate executives who attempted to destroy my career. I answer truthfully that I feel none. Bitterness is an unproductive emotion that drains creative energy. Management attempted to bury my contributions under executive titles, corporate politics, and false accusations. But they failed to realize that true technical competence cannot be stolen by placing a new name on a PowerPoint slide. They tried to erase me from the blueprint, and instead, they made me the legal owner of the entire building.